There was a man at the edge of time, or rather, the last remnants of a man. It had been eons since he had forgotten his name, so he just called himself Xerxes. He always thought that name sounded cool. Xerxes was a brain in a jar. Perhaps that description puts it far too simply. Going forward, see Xerxes as a brain in a glass vat, suspended in pseudo-amniotic fluid, while wires crisscross and intertwine around his gray matter like vines. And know that they were the only things that allowed him movement. Smash. Standing as one of the few sounds left in the wasteland, an iron elephant foot was dropped onto the cracked sand, in which the other leg next to it was lifted with a thunderous metallic groan, and, once more, the metal leg was thrusted into the ground. Xerxes shook ever so slightly in his jar. Then he felt rattling. Whipping winds began striking at the bolts of his armor, even harder than ever before. The towering dunes of this desert were seemingly spitting at his journey, incessantly battering his metal carapace with sandstorm after sandstorm. But luckily, he felt nothing. He shouldered on. For Xerxes was a humanoid tank, a mechanical corpse with guns for teeth, a demigod perched upon steel alloy stilts, where every square inch of his synthetic body was lined with weaponry, devices strong enough to slaughter gods within nanoseconds. And they have before. Smash. He stops shifting the bulk of his form from side to side, then moving the cube of metal that was his head towards the sky. He was conserving his energy, a task that had to be done from time to time, lest his inner workings overheat from the stress. The sky was dark, perpetually so. The planet he stood on turned at an unbearably slow pace, where each of its years contained just a single day and a single night. But even if there was any light in the sky, solar power wouldn't be enough to power a single circuit of the endlessly complex vessel he inhabited. Even then, the sun the planet circled was barely even a star anymore. It was decayed, shrunken, just as every other star in the universe. Xerxes sat stargazing at a sky full of white dwarves, each one dimmer than the other. They weren't the shimmering pearls that they used to be anymore, but rather the shadows of them. Without any galaxies or planets in the way, Xerxes was staring into the mouth of infinity, empty and unbearably vast. He felt cold and lonely. Luckily, he was able to easily lock those feelings away on a server that was bolted adjacent to his hippocampus. Then, he felt doubtful too. Perhaps he should just scan the planet again to be sure. And that he did, and found nothing. Not even coal. We just had to be so wasteful. His mind whirred. He thought back to the past, or at least struggled to. There was a time when oil was enough, where all fuel could be kept within a single biosphere. But eventually new advancements just started needing more and more energy. Then it was uranium that needed to be burnt, then the sun, then more suns, then collapsing black holes, then entire galaxies, and soon, the human race started throwing everything into the blazing furnace that was man. It was time to move. With just half a thought, Xerxes commanded his suit to start up again. Numerous whirs and clanks were wheezed out of the seams in his armor's plating, and soon he resumed his journey. Unfortunately, his fuel cells were running low. The neutron star samples in the heart of his machine were reduced to mere pebbles now. The antimatter reactions running in his shoulder blades were no more than just firecrackers by this point. White dwarves were one of the last remaining fuel sources of humanity, and even they were dying. Fortunately, there was a final ember to be used in the universe. It was an unorthodox fuel source, esoteric yet viable. They were staring at our faces ever since Neanderthals started barking at each other in stone speak. The whispering fires that stood atop mountains, the messages transported into the heads of prophets. They were always there, worshipped, then ignored, and soon discovered once more. And now, they were sought after. Xerxes was on a quest, and unfortunately, quests required obstacles. The ground crumbles and quakes. A sound is heard, 1,000 dead horses galloping on the ceiling of hell. Metallic arms burst from the ground beneath, all sprawling out around him like a sea of iron snakes. They quivered and shook, rotating and snapping toward Xerxes. Each spindly fist opened and morphed in their shapes, like an army of antenna serpents unhinging their jaws into the shapes of cannons. Zombie marauders. They were all like him, albeit much, much smaller in stature. They were all body parts within machine skeletons. Back when man still had skin, people always just replaced their failing organs with new ones. Better ones, in fact. If a planet's atmosphere fizzled out, they'd just remove their lungs and replace them with air tanks. Eventually, most people thought to go the extra mile by removing their brains' need for air altogether, by submerging them in oxygen-rich liquids. Then, they all became brains in jars. A shockwave thunders through dirt. A humanoid missile propels itself towards the walking tank. Within milliseconds, Xerxes scanned over each of the hundreds of machines that were buried underground. They were all dead. Not a single thought sat within their minds, and if there were any, they were rotting within ancient memory files. It didn't matter. It didn't matter if all organic matter died within these machines. If the fuel cells still had power, the automatic self-protection programs would still remain functional. They were all practically dead hands clinging to still firing weaponry. 1,000 golden arches are flung into the ashen cesspit that is the sky. Each plasma flare spat out by the zombies could topple mountains as they screamed through the air. Xerxes stood in the center of the quickly enveloping chaos, reminiscing to all the fun he had with the infinite possibilities of body customization. A thought crept out from between the circuits of his brain, however. The story of Theseus' ship. It was an old memory, ancient even. If he replaced each part of an object one by one, was it still the original? Was he still himself after all of these replacements? That thought scared him, so he deleted it. The firepower of 1,000,000 screaming suns barrel through the stale air, all coalescing as a horrid phoenix with eyes set upon our hero. With just 2 thoughts, the battlefield became serene. All of the ambushing androids were either flung to a nearby moon or completely wiped from our plane of reality. Xerxes walked on without breaking a mechanical sweat. For a technological difference of just 100 years was enough to defeat these fossils. It was a battle between a god and an army of ants. Pitiful, the quest resumed. The mountain was within view. Xerxes soon regretted wasting so much of his remaining energy on crushing ants, but luckily he had enough. A twisting silhouette could be seen floating upon the mountain peak, so he was getting close. But then the fog dissipated, and there he saw it. Uncountable glistening wings that were adorned with fractal plumes. an inconceivable face bleeding out wisps of distorted reality, a body of curving space-time that formed the shape of a halo, bending within itself, both inside and out. Xerxes had finally found one. It was an angel. Since the dawn of man, they were untouchable, inconceivable, but not anymore. In a micro-instant, the culmination of Xerxes' final energy reserves came to life as 1,000,000 jettisoned motes of light. The area of localized reality that laid at the base of the mountain collapsed within itself as the ground bent downward, like a glove turned inside out and then lit on fire from within. All was bright and distorted. The angel sang an aria, seemingly as a cry for mercy. A cannon then replied with a "Let there be light," and the song was silenced. The dust soon settled, and reality soon bent itself back into regularity. The angel was immobilized, but not dead. Xerxes was practically limping at this point, drawing what little energy he could from what was left floating dead in the air. He scanned the paralyzed seraphim and found 2 heartbeats, both beating in a descending shepherd tone. These beings seemed to defy all logic, all pillars of both biology and physics, and yet they had hearts. What stuck with Xerxes, though, was the fact that all angels had just a singular heart. And so, the realization struck. He had hit the celestial jackpot. There used to be a sense of guilt rattling around in his head over this, a disgust of killing such heavenly creatures, but deleting negative thoughts was merely second nature to him now. He was no longer aware of these deletions by this point, for the horrid memories were usually discarded, but the reflex to do so always stayed. A bulbous outline of bent space quivered in the impossibly flowing air. The angle struggled to cover its stomach with a few dozen of its wings, but failed. Within the translucent, warped sphere laid a fetus, constantly transmuting itself between silver and impossibly complex alloys of gold. A blade slid out of one of Xerxes' arms, coated in a fluid that could slip itself through the field of repulsion that emanated from the creature. The angel could be used as fuel, of course, but it was too old, far too old. It must have been alive since the days of man first sticking its hesitant foot on the moon. Their energy decreased with age, just as potential energy leaks out of the rocks that roll down hills. But the child within this old goddess was ripe with infinite possibility. The incessant and blinding swell of its newly formed wings could power him until the heat death of the universe and then some. He was practically jittering in his jar in anticipation. He laid the blade upon its belly. The possible incision held the weight of all time on its hilt. It was history in the form of a cut, where all possible landmarks in the chronology of man dimmed in comparison. Xerxes thought about those who failed before him, who merely gave up. There were those who believed that humanity had done all that it could and that it was time to depart. There were those who were fine with a ending, fine with the existence of a last page, fine that we won't be around for the epilogue. But not Xerxes. No, Xerxes believed that man was infinite, that man was eternal. He believed that man should exist since the beginning and the end of both Alpha and Omega, and the eras so inconceivably beyond, no matter the cost. This fateful bisection was a seal on the letter to God that read, "When man runs out of stars to use, it burns your cherubs like coal." Some inchling of disgust wriggled out of his mind, some paternal revulsion of killing a child such as this. Of course, it was deleted without him even realizing. He pushed the blade into the glimmering womb, and he soon found out that angels lacked the ability to scream. It sang,